Weird Shit I've Seen as a Marine by 035 None. Growing up playing video games and watching war movies, I didn't think twice about joining the Marines so I could be in the infantry. I went through all the training and the unwelcome hardship that really makes you reconsider your decision. Anyway, I got stationed to a desert base known as 29 Palms, the largest piece of military-controlled land in the US. It covers approximately 930 square miles in total. It's fucking huge. It's in Southern Carolina, a few hours away from Mexico. When you're that far out, you start to see some shit. Anyway, fast forward to my first field op and me losing my shit. To put things into perspective as to how far away we are from civilization, the closest man-made object is about a 3-hour drive away. This day was particularly hot because it broke 130, as if the sun said, "I told you I could." So we spent the day hiding in camouflage tents and learning various military tactics. Once the sun set, we were set off into the night to get some realistic training done. At night, we practiced using our night vision optic to do simple shit, like loading and reading maps. It produces an image off the ambient infrared light, so you can see a lot more with that shit than the naked eye. The sky is just absolutely cluttered with stars. I can see a shooting star every few seconds, even the Milky Way. It's pretty damn cool. Finally, after roaming around aimlessly for what felt like forever, we head back and were granted a few hours of sleep. I lay down and finally start to drift off. I'm suddenly woken up after what felt like 10 minutes and I get up instantly. "Get up, bitch. You're on watch." God damn it. I get dressed and stand at my post dutifully like I'm told at the checkpoint. I'm given a radio and told only to lift the barbed wire after it gets approved over the radio. It's maybe around 2 a.m. and everyone else in my company is dead asleep, except for myself and the officer in the comm truck. All I can hear are coyotes. I decide to start looking at the stars with my night vision. I hear a coyote yelp off in the distance and think nothing of it. A few minutes later, another Marine comes from over a small hill in front of me. Nothing crazy, probably just out there taking a shit. He walks towards me, but his eyes, they don't reflect any light. Rationally, one of us is probably dehydrated, so I think nothing of it. As he approaches me, and after a few seconds of staring at me, he just simply says, "Can I come in?" His voice didn't sound right. No inflection or questioning tone. Weird. I ask him what his name was and why he was out so far taking a dump. He tells me his name is Sergeant Wright, and he ignores my dumb question. Same weird voice. Granted, I'm new to the unit, so I don't know anyone named Sergeant Wright, but I still had to verify it. "Maine, this is Road Guard 1. There was a Sergeant Wright requesting entry. Over."
Road Guard 1, this is Maine. There is no Sergeant Wright in this company, and the closest unit is 25 miles away. Make sure... Shit. Get the fuck back here, right now. Don't let him in, or even look at him. Run.
As the weird dude started to hear this, his face changed to severely angry, like he wanted to rip my throat out and drink my blood. By the time I got back, everyone's awake. All of the vehicle lights are turned on, and everyone is packing up, scrambling into the trucks. We leave a lot of shit behind, like tents, water, and food. We drive for 3 hours back. I never got an explanation from anyone, but my squad leader, who's a simple, backwoods kind of guy, who said bluntly that whatever I saw wasn't asking to get through the gate. I never really understood what he meant by that, until I discovered this subreddit. More to come. I'm going to try to do these in chronological order as fast as I can. As you can guess, they get crazier as we go. They're all in chronological order, starting with my first day out in the desert to my most recent field op deployment, whatever you want to call it. Mountain Edition. After my most recent creepy experience with weird-looking people scaring the fuck out of me, we went somewhere much more terrifying. A remote little Marine Corps base called Bridgeport. It's built to train Marines in the art of mountain warfare. There's a lot of mountains, it's cold, it's windy, and if you ever go there, you will hate your life too. Anyway, when we first get there, we stay in these creepy concrete huts with bunk beds in them. There's a bathroom, some showers, and that's about it. You fight over the outlets to charge your electronics, and there's not really any heat there besides a bunch of Marines crammed into one area. The first few days are miserable. Your body has to adjust to the new altitude. The air has less oxygen, so physical work and exercise plays out in slow motion. Oh, and you're constantly tired and all you want to do is sleep. There isn't much in the terms of fresh food, and, things can get pretty bleak if you have the wrong mindset. You wouldn't believe me if I told you that these were the better times, huh? Eventually, we march up into the mountains, carrying our ridiculously heavy packs, stuffed to the brim with warming layers, food, water, and nicotine. The first few days were pretty easy. We would hike all day, stop, rest, learn a few things about survival and stuff like that. There was some snow on the lower parts, but not a ton, thankfully. Around the fourth night, someone had the awesome idea of making us practice our nighttime navigation skills. I'm a pretty decent navigator myself, so of course I was up to the challenge. No big deal. They hand out the compasses, maps, and protractors, and set up an elaborate system of how to get to the finish line. It was staggered so people weren't walking all over each other. This is where things get interesting. I'm in the woods. It's dark and cold, and I hate my life, so I'm stumbling through the trees and the brush loud as hell without a care in the world. I just want to finish this dumb thing so I can go to sleep. I get to my first point because there's some moonlight shining through the trees. The second point, it was placed in a fucking river. And I still remember how livid I was, standing in the river, copying down the word donkey, etched into an ammo can on top of a rock, in the middle of a fucking freezing cold river. Wet boots will drive a man insane. I stop to squeeze the moisture out of my socks, and I get this primal feeling that I'm being watched. I stand completely still, but all I can hear is my heart beating. No wind, no wildlife, just me. My first thought is that it's a Marine trying to piggyback off my success. I put my soggy boots back on and do what anyone would do. I crest the next hill so I could stop and listen. Nothing. Maybe I'm just freaking the fuck out. Screw this. I keep walking. 10 minutes later, I get the same feeling again. Any rookie stalker knows that you have to match the person's steps so they don't hear you. So I start to randomly stop or change my step. After a few wholehearted tries, I don't hear any footsteps. But I do hear breathing. If it's a fucking mountain lion or something crazy, I have no choice but to keep walking and hope that I could pull out my stupid dull Gerber knife in time. About this time, I get to my third and final point. It's near a road, so I can cut straight east and literally book it up the road. I still feel like I'm being followed the entire time, but I feel safer because I could hear the low roar of a Humvee engine up the road. Looking back, I led whatever it was right to the rest of us. And that was a dumb mistake. Nothing else happens that night. Everyone else gives up and just uses the road to make it back to camp. Those who don't make it back are told to walk towards the beeping horn. Funny. I finally get to sleep in the safety of numbers. We used the next day to remediate our nighttime land nav skills and refuel our bodies with food. Once the sun sets, we march back off into the mountains in a file. Unfortunately, since I carry a rocket launcher, my natural position is in the back, but not the very last, so at least that's a positive. We spend our early night hiking. We're all moving pretty fast, probably 20 meters spaced apart. At times, it's common to lose sight of each other. All of us are getting pretty exhausted. Suddenly, shit gets dark, like the ambient light is being absorbed. I get that same primal fear. Extreme silence? Yep. Fuck. I keep walking without a word until I hear someone, probably the guy behind me, call my name. I turn around and he looks at me like I'm a fucking idiot. What the fuck? Keep going, dude. They're gonna lose us. Okay. Weird. Who called my name? I spin back around to try to see my way through the bush for the guy in front of me. I get a glimpse of him and discreetly yell at him to slow down, but he doesn't even hear me. What the fuck? About the same time, I hear the dude from behind me. Dude, what the fuck is that? I heard light rustling of leaves and some twigs snap, but that's about it. I run back maybe 15 meters, which isn't far, but at night it is. There's nothing but his backpack on the ground and his rifle. I call his name. Nothing. I reach for my radio. Dead. I turn on both of my flashlights. Dead. Fuck. 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 I start yelling. I blow my rape whistle that they made me pack. Nothing. I don't know how long it took them to realize I was missing, and how they backtracked their way to me, but it felt like hours. I could feel whatever it was out there just waiting, fucking toying with me. I told them everything, and they were convinced that the guy just got lost. They spread out and looked for him for a few hours, but ultimately came up with nothing. Sometime in the next morning, one of the fucking hippie park volunteers found him, 30 kilometers away, across multiple mountains. He was bleeding from his ears and didn't even know his own name. Of course, he was in extreme hypothermia and had a ton of bruises on him, but no severe bleeding. They ended up getting a helicopter to take him to the closest hospital. More to come tomorrow. Bonus picture. I snapped this picture on day 3 as we were ascending upwards to give you an idea of how thick things can get and visualize stuff. Also, I made a Twitter specifically to elaborate on certain things, post more pictures, post updates for the story. I'll release the next edition as soon as I finish it on Twitter. I got so many DMs asking me for a second part. I seriously tried my best to answer all of them. I feel really bad and I apologize if I didn't get to you. If this Twitter thing isn't allowed, just let me know if I delete it. Twitter.com/035none. Following the mysterious incident, I was told that I was going to have to go down the mountain to answer a few questions. To be honest, I was relieved. It was cold and I didn't want to hike anymore. Everyone else in my company just sort of believed what they were told. He came down with mountain sickness and just walked 30 kilometers over the course of a few hours. Right. I tried to tell a few people about the creepy shit that I'd been noticing, just to make sure I'm not going crazy. Before anyone could respond, my squad leader pulled me aside and said, "Don't talk about these things, okay?" Maybe he knew something I didn't. But yeah, cool. They sent us up here, knowing something was fucking off. Typical military bullshit. Just stick our heads in the sand and pretend everything is great. I was glad I was leaving for a few days. But there was nothing but complete dread whenever the idea of coming back entered my mind. The Humvee to take me back down finally showed up. The ride was uneventful. They took me to a small, concrete, office-like building. Military police guys were just like me and had a job to do. They got my statement and asked if I noticed anything unusual about the guy before he disappeared. No, he totally seemed normal to me. Then the NCIS guys came in. I've dealt with them before over something else. They're usually pretty good-natured guys. Not these ones. Brisk and to the point. Methodical. They read off all the facts on the case like they were reading nutrition off a cereal box. Unsurprised and monotone. They had definitely seen this before. They asked the same questions. When I told them about all the creepy things I noticed, they told me I was probably suffering from mountain sickness too. I was beyond pissed, but I knew better than to argue with them. Another thing, they asked me if I had taken any pictures that day. I told them I didn't, but I thought that it was strange. Next, they asked me if they could swab my boots. To this day, I am honestly confused as to why the hell they would do that. I didn't know if they were fucking with me at this point or if it was something else. My only assumption is that this thing alters the surrounding area on like a microscopic level. Maybe there was an isotope it produces that stayed on my boots. I have no clue. But if anyone has any similar stories on that they'd like to share, please let me know. At the conclusion of my interview, they made me sign a document stating that I wouldn't talk about anything and they would contact me when I was free to disclose any information. This was a few years ago, and they never got back to me, so it may not be legal to talk about it now, but I have cards on my sleeve. That I won't talk about. Anyway, back to our fabulous 5-star concrete huts to get some sleep. Thankfully, I wasn't alone there. There were a few guys that stayed back, because they had sickle cell anemia and could die if they went out to a certain altitude. I took one of the best hot showers I've ever had in my life, and then headed back to my bunk. I was exhausted, but I still couldn't sleep. Now, I rarely smoke, but I still carry a pack on me just to make lucrative trades or sell them to desperate nicotine fiends in the field. I felt like, you know what, now's a good time to smoke. So I went outside. Maybe it would calm me down. All was going well until that dreadful feeling came back again. Shit. The tree line is maybe 40 meters away. I don't know how the hell it could have followed me or why. Could there be more than one? I stomped out my cigarette and went back inside. I managed to calm myself down and fall asleep, but I would always wake up suddenly after like maybe 10 minutes. No dreams, just that overwhelming feeling of being observed. The next day, I packed up all my gear into the Humvee and helped the driver load some stuff into the back. The drive was uneventful, and I managed to catch some sleep, only to be woken up by rough terrain here and there. When we finally arrived, it was almost afternoon and the company was preparing to cover some serious terrain that day. Just my luck. Before I knew it, we were trotting up a deep mountainside. I didn't think it could get any worse until it began to sleet heavily. It was bad. The wind picked up and it felt like being cut with glass. I couldn't see. People were getting lost on the rocks, were slippery. We hiked for hours upon hours. I swear these mountains were trying to kill us. The sun began to set and our clothes began to freeze on us. If that wasn't bad enough, I noticed that our compasses were acting weird. No matter how hard you tried, you would eventually end up walking towards the base of a particular mountain. It was nicknamed the Devil's Incline on our map. This was a military map that someone had made in the 1980s. I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Coincidentally, I also got that same feeling of being stalked again. Fuck. Anyway, our guides led us to the right destination. A place called Sardine Rock. As soon as we stop, people start shaking violently because They're no longer hiking and producing zero body heat. Someone was smart enough to predict this and had two-man tents driven up to our rendezvous point on massive trucks. We rarely use tents, but this was literally a life-or-death situation. To make things worse, the wind picked up and it started to downpour violently. You couldn't even hear yourself talk. It was utter chaos. If you ever set up a tent in the wind, then you know how impossible it is. By the time we had everything staked in, the tents had a few inches of water at the bottom. Our sleeping systems are waterproof, but our entire bodies were soaked to the bone. So they eventually became wet from the outside in. Then the temperature dropped and things got worse. Being in the military, you always have someone on watch. Since there was still sunlight out, I volunteered to stand it while everyone else hid in their tents. Here's a picture I asked my friend Jake to take, just to illustrate the misery. My Cortex rain jacket is completely soaked through. Easily the worst day of my life. Finally, I got back inside the tent and tried to get some rest. I don't remember falling asleep, but I was suddenly woken up by someone outside asking for help. It was the same voice of the guy who ended up 30 kilometers away, except that guy is still in the hospital. He would call someone's name and say it a few times to try to get them outside. I think it was my squad leader who yelled at everyone to stay the fuck in their tents and not to go outside. For the next few minutes, he practically begged us. It sounded like he was in the tree line maybe 20 meters away, somehow guessing our names. Here it was, trying to break us down when we were at our lowest point. It could have gotten right through our tents, but it wanted to fuck with us. Finally, it stopped, just as I thought it was gone. I heard it say my name twice, in a taunting kind of tone. Then a huge tree came tumbling down. That was it. Thanks, Dick. Traumatized, everyone stayed in their tents until we heard the trucks coming. Over the radio, we were told to pack up our tents in less than 30 seconds and get onto the trucks. We had no more than 5 minutes. I wasn't going to be the first one to step outside, so I waited until a good number of people had got out. I've never seen a group of people move faster in my entire life. The tents were stuffed into their bags, poles bent and bags halfway onto our bodies. People practically stumbled onto the trucks. We were told that we were being evacuated due to the horrible conditions of the mountain, and that we were heading back to base. But we all knew the real reason. I was relieved to be out of the cold, but we were still on this damn mountain and that thing would still be able to find us. When we got back, I showered and got into dry clothes. No one talked. They just went to sleep and tried to understand what had gone down that day. Each and every single one of them, realizing that we would likely go back up there in a few days. Here's another picture of a friend taking a break while we stepped off our hike for that day. First and foremost, I want to apologize for the lack of updates. On Wednesday, I had something called duty, which is essentially sitting in the concrete box with a telephone for 24 hours. On Thursday, I got caught up on all of the messages I'd been sent. Now, I left out all of my personal details in my story, and even in the pictures provided. However, I still received a threat via text from an unknown number. It couldn't have been any of my friends because 1, they're all in the field still, and I'm the only one back. 2, because all the pictures I've never shown to anyone. The threat was simple. Keep writing and I'll tell command who you are and what you're saying. My first reaction was to utilize the legal services on base. They assured me that what I'm doing is perfectly fine, as long as I maintain that my stories are not officially endorsed by the USMC. However, I am still beyond creeped out that someone found me. I don't think I'll stop unless something really crazy happens. But we'll find out together, won't we? Anyway, here's my final addition to my time in the mountains. The next morning after being evacuated, everyone was obviously exhausted, and a few guys were sick with pneumonia. Being wet, cold, and nearly scared to death really took a toll. I don't think the incident with the thing on the outside of our tents was talked about in large groups, but it was definitely talked about often on the side. A few guys maintained the fact that it was just a great big prank and laughed it off, but whenever they laughed, it was like they were asking for some sort of validation. Even in the rear, we were kept busy cleaning weapons and gear and getting ready for whatever was next. Our unit has an unexplainable obsession with training. It really cut into our morale, but it made time go by fast. Life seemed pretty normal despite the weather. I stayed indoors at all times unless we were exercising. I didn't have the heart to tell anyone that it was probably watching us from the trees, even if I didn't feel it. The farthest I had ventured was maybe a week after coming down the mountain. The base has a small store with an inventory identical to a gas station. I had gotten tired of what they were feeding us, and my mind had started to rationalize all of my fear away. So, I went. Nothing crazy happened, but I did, however, notice that there were people who were definitely not Marines. These guys were big, burly, and sported full beards. I pretended to look at a selection of Doritos and caught a glimpse of a particular trident tattoo. This meant whoever this person was a Navy SEAL, currently or at some point. I wonder about the other guys. I approached the bearded guy and asked if he was a SEAL. He turned around to look at me and he simply looked at me and said, "Yeah, sure. How'd you know?" Tattoo's a dead giveaway. I used to see my college roommate hang all that motivational shit up over the room. "Oh, really?" was all he said. I didn't really know what to say, but I wanted to impress him. Yeah, he's actually a SEAL now. His demeanor got a little friendlier. "No shit, what's his name?" "Kurtz, he's an officer." "Is his first name Walter?" "Yeah, it is. Do you know him?" "Do I know him?" "He's outside smoking a cigarette." A little info on my friend. We worked out a lot together, as we both had a sick fascination with pain, either running, hiking, or swimming. We would torture ourselves nearly every day until he left. I kept up with him as much as I could with the training cycles. Then he just disappeared. I'm talking gone. On every social media platform, everything. I talked to his parents and all they got from him was the occasional letter. It always bothered the hell out of me that he straight up disappeared from the world without saying a damn thing. I thought about it nearly every day. And there he was, outside. All I wanted to do was get one good punch in. Navy SEAL or not, he's still a dick. When we stepped outside and I saw him, I still hated his guts. But I had a feeling that me and a bunch of SEALs probably wasn't gonna work, despite having the power of God and anime on my side. He didn't even notice me until I said his name. In any other settings, I probably would have saluted him since he was an officer and I was just enlisted scum, but I didn't give a shit. He seemed genuinely happy to see me and wouldn't let go of my hand. We did some catching up, mostly questions from him about my boring life. Whenever I would ask him stuff, he would either deflect and make a joke or give me a one-word answer. The man just wouldn't elaborate on what he's been up to. After about 10 minutes of talking, the group decided they were done stocking up on Mountain Dew and gummy worms. Before they headed back, Kurtz pulled me to the side and threw his cigarette on the ground with a look of complete concern and worry. He said, "Listen, you really shouldn't go back up there. This ain't the place you want to be. You understand?" I wasn't really sure what to say. I just nodded solemnly before he shook my hand and left. That was the last time I'd be able to talk or see him. One thing to note is that the group of guys didn't all have beards and tattoos. Don't get me wrong here, but Navy SEAL guys have a certain look. I can't explain it unless you've been around them long enough. but not everyone in that group was a SEAL. I saw a guy wearing an army-related shirt, so I'm assuming they were some kind of cross-branch team. Anyway, I headed back to the concrete motels and spent some time reading, just trying to get my mind off of what he had said. Should I break my ankle or pretend to be sick? They don't have Uber up here and the highway is some distance away. Ultimately, I decided that my pride was more important than my life, and I ended up going back into the mountains. I felt nothing but dread. Here I was, being stalked and harassed by some thing, and on top of that, the Marine Corps is destroying my body every day. My human body isn't designed to hike 175 kilometers in a week with 200 pounds of gear, let alone up mountains. However, sometimes you get a break. The hikes were relatively short, and all we did was practice our rock climbing skills at night. After about 3 weeks in the mountains, my body started to get used to the altitude and the amount of physical activity that we were doing. I was counting down the days in my head every few minutes, making quick calculations and crunching the numbers on each activity and how much closer I was to safety. Things weren't going to be that easy, of course not. I had a pretty decent amount of anxiety and dread the entire time, but I rationalized with it just in my mind. I didn't notice it until the third day. We had peaked one of the larger mountains that we were headed towards the Devil's Incline. It had to be a mistake. Because the compasses have been acting weird, right? Well, I talked to one of the higher-ups and sure enough, that was our final destination, because the CO thought that it would be a challenge. Great. They're leading us straight to our deaths. Dulce et decorum-esque kind of deal. The closer we got, the worse I felt about the whole thing. I couldn't sleep for more than 10 minutes because I swear I could feel it watching me. Not wanting to go crazy, I confided in my squad leader and all he said was, "Yeah, I feel it. Don't want to talk about it." The next day, we were briefed with our final training exercise. Our job was to assault the Devil's Peak Incline. A vast majority of it would be climbing using carabiners and rope, and traditional technique. The final 500 meters is mostly gravel and can be traversed on foot. We would be provided overwatch by special forces operating in the area. Nothing new. The military is really imaginative. If we see them, ignore them. We begin the assault at sunset and get to the middle of the mountain around midnight. Everything's going pretty smooth. We're climbing the cliff slowly and methodically. On one particularly large cliff, I set up one of the anchor points so that the Marines can rappel from the other side of the cliff. I turn around and head for the next cliff, but before I start to climb, someone angrily asked me why the hell I cut the rope and that I could have gotten someone killed. I respond that I didn't cut it and head back to see what the hell happened. The rope? The rope was sliced perfectly, like surgically. If you ever cut climbing rope before, you know that it almost is impossible to get a clean cut. You'll always end up with a little bit of fraying, even with the sharpest of knives. This rope has no fraying at all. I'm assuming that it was the same thing that's been harassing us all month, trying its best to kill one of us. Fortunately, there weren't many cliffs after that. The 500-meter slope of gravel turned out to be way too steep to hike straight up. Also, out of nowhere, a blizzard decided to make our lives hell. To this day, I've never seen such horrible weather. We're talking 70-mile-an-hour winds, whiteout conditions, everything. It was just insane. On the way up, I swore I was going to freeze to death. The slope seemed like it was never going to end. After about 3 hours, someone mentioned that multiple Marines were missing. Our first reaction was to stop and sit there for an hour, then send half of us back down in an attempt to find the Marines. That was the coldest I have ever been in my life. At least hiking provided some warmth, but sitting there being buried alive in the snow and wind, it was bad. I don't know who made the call to keep pushing forward to the top, but it was the only way anyone was going to survive. There was a road on the other side of the mountain with vehicles most likely waiting for us. There was no use in kicking around for any more Marines in the snow because things were just getting worse. Pretty much everyone had some form of frostbite. We just didn't have the right gear to protect ourselves. Finally, we get to the top and thankfully there's tents waiting for us. The tent I got was so broken that I ended up piling in with a bunch of other guys like sardines. What a shit show that was, setting up in the wind. They gave us maybe 20 minutes while they figure out what to do about the missing guys. I'm assuming that they called the proper authorities way before that. It was too windy for helicopters and nearly impossible for us to search the area. A wrong gust of wind could literally throw us down the mountain, tumbling face first. Their solution first was to use thermal optics at the top to search for the guys. Nothing. Then we all got in a big line and held hands as we walked down the mountain. Nothing. Granted, we didn't bring 200 pounds of crap with us, so it was a lot easier walking back up. But by now it was 4 a.m. and things just seemed to be getting worse. They told us to go back to our tents and warm up for 20 minutes because guys were literally turning into zombies. Now, this is quite possibly the weirdest part. For the next 12 hours, nobody remembers what the hell happened. Everyone woke up in the tents and have zero recollection. It was daytime now and everything was covered in snow. A few of the Special Forces guys, including Kurtz, were all talking to my higher-ups about something. I didn't find out until later that the SF dudes, Special Forces, found all of our missing guys at various locations. Not 30 kilometers far, but not much shorter, like 5 to 10 kilometers. Ears bleeding too. While it's not impossible to hike in a few hours, it's damn hard to get lost on a mountain where your only objective is to go up. Not to the side, not around, not down. Up, damn it. We radioed into base camp and they sent up special vehicles in the snow to get us. They kinda resembled half-tracks. The same day, they loaded us up on these special snow trucks and told us that we're going back to barracks. When we got there, they debriefed us on how successful our mission was and some bullshit about accountability of guys. Blah, blah, blah. In any other situation, they would have definitely lost their jobs if they lost a Marine. Just not in Bridgeport, I guess. We packed up our bags that night and got woken up around 3 a.m. to get bussed back to the desert. I was extremely relieved not to be back. No one ever talked about our time there again. The guys who disappeared came back from the hospital saying that they don't remember anything or that they didn't want to talk about it. Never go to Bridgeport, folks. Bonus pictures. Here's a picture of me sitting on the rock at the base of the Devil's Incline. To this day, I don't know what the hell the distortion is, and I honestly could not have done that if I tried. This could be why the NCIS guys asked if I had taken any pictures. I obviously blurred out my face and serial number. I'm talking about the bottom half of the photo. And here's some creepy old buildings that I found on the way there. I wonder why they were abandoned. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at 035none for more pictures. After Bridgeport, we were given a pretty decent amount of time off due to various military and public holidays. I spent most of it drinking and sleeping, as well as indulging myself in the countless luxuries I'd gone without while away in the mountains. It was nice to finally relax and recover a bit. However, good things don't last long. Pretty soon we packed our bag, grabbed heavy things, and headed off to the desert. We went through a few short but boring field ops you guys wouldn't want to hear about. But one in particular was in December, and things had drastically changed weather-wise. It was now winter and the temperature hovered just above freezing. The wind was the worst part. You could wear 5 billion layers and somehow the wind would cut through all of them and just slowly drain the heat out of your body. It was miserable. For the first few days, we did some live fire exercises. The funnest part was when they had me blow up a piece of plywood riddled with nails labeled "door" to simulate a breach. Except someone cut the time fuse on the charge a little too short, and it went off right as I had gotten behind cover. The rifleman flooded through the smoke and dusty blindness and cleared the objective of those evil, horrible paper targets. It was great. Our next destination was a giant ghost town in the middle of the desert. Now get this, it was extremely detailed and built to simulate a real city in the Middle East. But when we got there, it was pretty dark and the streetlights were on. We quickly grabbed our packs and found a vacant building to set up in. It was pretty creepy because there were old paintings on the wall and furniture in every room. And they had details like old computers and treadmills with power outlets. It was as if they quite literally copy and pasted an entire town into this desert. Hundreds upon hundreds of buildings, complexes, bazaars, churches, well, everything. Being out of the wind and given a few hours to sleep, I figured I could get some solid rest before the training scenario started the next day. Nope. All throughout the night, I was woken up throughout the entire night by a constant banging noise. I figured the wind had picked up and there was some sort of loose shutter or door somewhere nearby. Great. When I had finally had enough, I put the foam ear protection we wear when we shoot. That worked and I slept like a log for the rest of the night. The next morning, we started the day just as the sun was coming up. It was still cold and windy, and I wasn't really excited to eat an MRE. So, I drank some water and basked in the early morning sun in a desperate attempt to stay warm. Pretty soon, our next task was explained to us. For the next few days, we would build a small base in one of the houses and send out patrols out into the city to look for insurgent fighters, also played by Marines. There would be civilian actors playing out roles like mayor, local religious leader, police chief, and so on. We were given some annoying laser tag system for our body and our rifle. Our rifle would fire a laser every time we fired a blank, and if we got shot by another laser, our tag system would start beeping loudly and repeat our status, injured or dead. It all sounded pretty cool, actually. We picked up a pretty large 3-story building next to the road and began to fortify our defenses. First, we surrounded the outside with tons of barbed wire. Then, we blocked off all the exits with sandbags and furniture, except for one. This was the only way to get in and out, and it was right in front of the machine gun that we had set up on the floor above. We blocked all of the windows on the 3rd floor and the stairs to get there with the furniture, just in case they decided to climb in somehow. They really weren't allowed to anyway. It was a well-built defense and we were all proud. No one was going to be able to sneak in. During the night, my squad went out on patrol to look for bad guys, while one squad slept and one squad defended our compound. All I can really say is that it was super creepy and exhausting. We must have walked for 2 hours and maybe made it halfway through the town. When we finally got back from our uneventful patrol, we were told to sleep for a few hours. Sure enough, I started hearing that same damn banging. This time, it was louder. It was like a dull thud on an old iron door. slow and methodical, never missed a beat. A few of us agreed that we would find out what the hell was making that noise and put an end to it on our next patrol. I put my foam earbuds back in and went to sleep for maybe an hour or two, before I was woken up by what sounded like a training grenade going off outside the building. Great. We were being attacked. It's 2 a.m. and there's people shooting at us and throwing fake grenades. A few people's laser systems are beeping loudly that they're notionally bleeding out. The rest of us are shooting out of the window and calling out targets. The machine gun above me is raining hot brass down the stairs. It was honestly a lot of fucking fun. The insurgents eventually disappear into the dark, and my squad is sent to pursue them. We checked the surrounding areas, but all we found were some unarmed civilians. They were pretty good actors, though, I'll give them that. I felt extremely immersed in the situation when they told us that they would only give us information if we gave them guns to protect themselves. Not gonna happen. On the way back to our base, I made sure we did a quick check for whatever that banging noise was that kept us up all night. We tracked the noise to a building that wasn't very far away from our little base. Maybe 2 houses or so over, but blocked from our view. Now, here's the weird thing. All of the windows and doors are covered with sheet metal and bolted shut. When we got close, the banging stopped, but we all knew it was coming from that building specifically. Unable to do anything, we went back and posted up on various positions to pull security so the other squad could rest. I got the short end of the stick and ended up on the window facing the direction of the building. Before I relieved the guy standing there, I asked him if he heard the noise from the building. He nodded and said that he heard it all night. I felt like Edgar Allan Poe listening to The Raven, slowly going mad all by myself. Somewhere in my dreamy stupor, I postulated that somehow one of the insurgents had snuck their way into the building, and they were pulling some kind of psyops on us by banging away all night. Just as I passed this along to someone, the banging stopped, and I looked like an idiot. Pretty soon, the sun came up. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful. We set up a few checkpoints and interacted with the locals, gave them water, asked about the insurgents, etc. Typical roleplay fun. But once the sun set, we were again harassed by the insurgent, but this time it was less fun because I'd slept maybe 3 or 4 hours in the past few days. It was over in like 10 minutes and another squad went out looking for them. I sat down trying to get a quick nap in, but the banging started right back up. I was getting pretty damn irritated at this point, so I insisted to head out with a few guys and check the surrounding buildings. The building with the banging had absolutely no way of getting in, so I got creative and thought maybe there's a tunnel. We went around to each house and kicked all the rugs around like some terrible guests, and boom, we found a hatch. Now, we were told not to enter any of the tunnels because the fans they used for ventilation were no longer functional. They told us that we could suffocate, but I didn't really think that we would use up all the oxygen in just a few minutes, so we made the decision to go down. We dropped down and it was absolutely pitch black, so we turned on our flashlights and proceeded forward into the tunnel. As we got closer to the ladder, we heard something similar to the sound you hear when a really old television turns on. Kind of like a mix between that and when your ears start ringing. All of the hair on my body stood up. There was a slight tinge of fear creeping up on me, but I decided to ignore it and started climbing up the ladder. I opened the hatch and immediately began clearing the pitch black room. Nothing. I moved towards the stairs and the rest of the guys followed in. At first, I thought it was something breathing hard from exertion, but now I was sure of it. I could hear the faintest of whispers, someone saying, "We're in here," coming from upstairs somewhere. We moved tactically up the stairs and began to clear the rooms out. When we got to the end of the hallway, there was what looked like a kid's room, and I went in. Nothing. The batteries on my flashlight started to fade out. It's impossible. I just replaced them that day, and they don't drain that fast. I think that it was either the corner or the closet, but I heard what sounded like... It sounded like a little girl's laugh. Maybe more like a giggle. I ran straight the hell out of there and was met with several what the fucks. Someone nervously asked me if that was me, and I said no, it wasn't. I made the executive decision that we were all getting the fuck out of there. All of us were already panicked at this point, so we tried to keep it together enough to get the fuck out of that house. We started to make our way back down the stairs when we heard the laughing again. As we approached the hatch, we noticed that, now of all times, there was tons of furniture stacked on top of it. Desks, wardrobes, couches, even a fucking microwave. Pretty soon, all our flashlights faded slowly, and we all scrambled toward the giant pile of shit. The rest of the flashlights died out, and everybody panicked and started blindly throwing and shoving things out of the way. The laughing, it grew louder and more sinister. It was almost like it was coming down the stairs. After what seemed like years, we cleared everything and opened the hatch. We jumped straight down and scrambled back to the other hatch and through the tunnel. We made it out and pretty much ran back to our little fort 25 or so meters away. All of us were scared to shit and nearly woke everyone up with our stumbling around and cursing. Our lieutenant asked us what had happened and, well, we told him. He wasn't really sure if he wanted to believe us or not, but his only response was, "Yep, I've heard some weird stuff about this town." And then he just walked away. We tried to sleep for the next few hours. I went up to the second floor because, well, I figured it would be the safest. I knew that I wasn't going to sleep with some creepy stuff going down next door, but it was nice to sit down and relax. Around 3 a.m., I heard what sounded like someone running upstairs, loudly. Now, this is impossible because we had blocked off the stairs to the third floor with desks and couches so no one could get in from the roof. A few guys were woken up and sent to go clear the upstairs out. Absolutely nothing. None of the furniture had been moved either. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, the townspeople started rioting outside of our compound. It was peaceful at first, but someone with a backpack detonated an imaginary IED, despite our best efforts. As soon as the IED went off, we took fire from pretty much everywhere, and a lot of us were killed. We were told to go to an aid station all the way across the city to get revived. I felt like a zombie from lack of sleep and countless patrols. Once we were revived, we were told that our mission had changed. We were no longer on the defensive, but we would start clearing out a sector of the town as a part of a larger force. This would be our final event, then we would be able to go home. We got maybe an hour of sleep before the sun went down and our offensive started. It was pretty easy at first, until we started to take contact from various buildings. We cleared most of them and didn't find anyone except for a few open hatches. We kind of sat around and held security while they figured out what to do. Logically, the people in charge should have concluded that the insurgents must have escaped through the tunnels, even though everyone was told not to use them. Cursing under my breath, our squad broke off and I followed our fearless leaders into one of the tunnels. It was pretty simple, but much longer this time. When we got to the very end, we climbed the ladder and tried opening the hatch, but it wouldn't budge. Awesome. We headed back the direction we came, and just as my cynical self predicted, the hatch we entered was stuck to. A few of the stronger guys attempted to muscle it open, but it was like someone had put a huge boulder on top of it. We tried our radios and they weren't working, so we resorted to just banging on the hatch. Nothing. A few guys started panicking, but all I wanted to do was just go to sleep. So I sat down and accepted my fate as I reconsidered if I made the right choices in life. I was never claustrophobic, but, I started to feel like I was. The guys were still banging loudly, and I started to filter them out. Maybe 5 minutes later, we heard someone banging on the hatch. We knocked back. They banged again. Someone yelled, "We're in here!" We waited a few seconds for a response, but what we heard back, it still haunts me. We heard the same damn little girl laugh we heard from the other night. We all froze. Whoever was on the other side started banging again, slowly and methodically. I felt like I was in a torture cell. I tried my best to drown the sound out and think of literally anything else. No one dared knock again. It must have been 2 or 3 hours, I don't remember. But it felt like an eternity before we heard footsteps from above. Everyone held their breath and listened. We heard furniture being shifted and a few curse words that quickly gave away their identity. Other Marines. Finally. Soon, the hatch was open, and before we were even all out of the tunnel, we were getting absolutely chewed to shreds. Multiple higher-ups yelling and cursing. The guys in charge of us were threatened with punishments, but I was personally pretty relieved to get yelled at. It definitely beat being stuck in there. From what I heard, they noticed we weren't part of the assault and assumed that we were put out of the game. They didn't realize until after they had regrouped that we were still missing. They got our last known location from one of the other squads who had entered the other tunnels near us and backtracked their way to us. I'm just glad that someone remembered where we were, because a lot of the buildings have the same damn paint job. Following the incident, it was nearly morning time, and we hung out until trucks came and picked us up and took us back to base. That was easily one of the more terrifying experiences, because being buried alive still scares the hell out of me to this day. Unfortunately, this is the only picture I managed to take of myself. There's an album of pictures in this article if you're interested. There's a lot of information about the range itself. 1,500 plus buildings, 1,866 feet of tunnels, $170 million spent, etc. Apologize for the time between updates. I've been exhausted by the time I get home from work. Hopefully, I'll have part 4 up this weekend. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at 035none. Also, for the explosives, the time fuse can be kind of tricky to work with. We do our best to get an accurate burn rate, but sometimes it just doesn't always match. I've gotten plenty of non-creepy related questions about the military stuff and life in general. I'm still considering whether or not I should do some kind of blog about my experiences, creepy or not. Feel free to PM me if there's interest. Thanks again for all of the positive support. Things seem to have calmed down in the desert for a few months. We'll skip over the uneventful field ops and go forward to March. It was still miserably cold and the wind still chilled us to the bone. The sun stayed in the skies just a little bit longer with each passing day. I just spent the rest of my Sunday packing and getting ready for an excruciating week-long field op. I've become quite knowledgeable of all the ranges, and each one of them having their own story. Usually, they briefed us on what we'll be doing, but this op was extremely tactical, and our objectives were on many different things, so we really didn't have a clue what we were doing. The first day, we drove out to some random compound with 4 walls. We dropped our packs and waited to get picked up by track vehicles, AAVs, all day and mostly slept. When night hit, a terrible sandstorm engulfed us. You couldn't even open your eyes for more than a few seconds. If you did, you could only see a couple of feet in front of you. It was equally amazing as it was terrifying. Around midnight, the track vehicles showed up and we piled inside gratefully. What you're seeing now is a picture of them. We expected we would go somewhere, but we ended up just sitting around for a few hours before abruptly started driving in an unknown direction. For about 2 hours, then we stopped and we waited for what felt like an eternity. We weren't allowed out, and the justification was we could notionally be shot and out of their little war game. Finally, after about 10 minutes, we were allowed to relieve ourselves and grab food out of our packs. We only had a few minutes to get it. It was dark outside. So, that means I just spent an entire day inside of a vehicle. But at least the sandstorm had died down. A few hours passed and I can't sleep sitting down on a bench with 16 Marines crammed into a vehicle meant for just 12. Everyone else is asleep except for one of the crewmen on the radio. Suddenly, we hear a knock on the back hatch. It was clear as day. I nudge a few guys to get them to open the hatch, but most of them just tell me to fuck off and go back to sleep. I played clueless card and put my head down, hoping that whoever knocked would go away. The knocking continued for about 30 more seconds, then stopped. Who the hell would be knocking anyway? We have radios for a reason. I spent a few hours falling in and out of sleep before someone wakes me up and tells me that we have 5 minutes to stretch and piss. I have no idea what time it is or where we are. We all pour out of our tin can prison and spread out. There are other vehicles around and none of the other Marines. We head over a dune and take a leak, and take a few seconds to admire the stars. It was a sight for sore eyes. Somewhere in front of me, I see a dark figure off in the distance. There were no AAVs over there, and we are arguably in the middle of nowhere. As they get closer, I can see it's a Marine, but I can't make out exactly who it is. They're wearing a flak jacket or Kevlar, in some ragged desert camo, and some type of boonie. That's not allowed during this field op. He gets closer and I recognize a familiar dead gaze that doesn't reflect any light. It looks very different this time. A different body, I guess. Don't talk to him. Don't look at him. I already broke one of these rules, so I start sprinting for the AAV. I tell everyone to get the fuck inside, with enough fear in my voice to get them to go. I grab my radio and I get in contact with the same lieutenant. Surely he would understand. He was the commander for the platoon that I was attached to, so I called him up on the radio. PBR Street Gang, this is Vehicle 6. There's a sergeant right in our perimeter.
Roger. Solid copy, Vehicle 6. PBR Street Gang, out.
I overhear a bunch of radio chatter coming from the crew compartments. 20 seconds later, the vehicle starts up and we're driving away into the desert for safer lands. Suddenly, we come to a grinding halt and people in gear go flying. I can feel the vehicle turn around and go back the way we just came. What the fuck? One of the crewmen ducks down from his turrets and informs us that one of the vehicles had just flipped where we were, and it was on fire. We're going back to help. Luckily, the Marines had gotten out just in time as it flipped. We were already packed to the brim, but we managed to make room for 4 more. All of the Marines were pretty banged up. We drove off assuming someone was called to deal with the burning AAV. There wasn't much that we could do with a single fire extinguisher we had in the passenger compartment. Someone asked one of the guys what happened to the AAV. His response was that they heard knocking on the hatch. They were told not to open it, and a few seconds later, the engine started and the whole thing flipped without even moving. Suddenly, a fire broke out. They all managed to scramble out before things got worse. This was not the first time this has happened. If you Google 29 Palms AAV accident, you'll see a ton of articles. It's apparently an extremely common thing. Most of them don't make the news unless someone gets hurt. We spent the next few hours driving somewhere unknown. I had no clue where we were, but I could tell the terrain had a lot more hills and ditches by the number of times we banged our head. We got word that we were preparing to do some kind of attack on a small town, so we spent the next 18 hours locked up in the tin can. occasionally moving short distances. The bad thing was that there was a fuel leak somewhere inside, and all I could smell and taste was fuel. It was pretty terrible. We slept a lot, which made sense because, well, we were being poisoned. Eventually, we stopped just outside a town we were tasked with clearing. The ramp dropped and we stumbled out into the sunlight. It was so bright. I felt blind. A few guys tripped because they were so lightheaded from the fumes. But I managed to keep my balance and run for cover behind the tanks. A few other assaultmen followed me. It was a terrible decision standing behind a tank. It's like standing right behind a jet engine because of the heat coming from the exhaust. They quite literally burned jet fuel, JP8. I was only in the cone of heat for maybe a second before I ran around the tank and sprinted towards town, tripping over rocks and coughing up fuel from my lungs. We made it to the town pretty soon. We discovered it was completely empty. It turned out that our enemy had been completely taken out by artillery and assault assets mostly. Of course, we spent our day airing out our lungs and appreciating the sunlight. Before we got back into the Amtrak, we drove to this seemingly empty spot in the middle of the desert. As soon as we stepped out, we noticed that things just started to light on fire. Now, this wasn't hell or anything crazy. We just stumbled upon an area where white phosphorus shells had been dropped. Being Marines, we were amused by the glorious fire rocks, and began kicking them at each other, before we got yelled at. We were told the trucks would come before sundown, but we didn't make it back to base until midnight. We spent all of Friday cleaning our weapons. We didn't get off until after 6 p.m. A friend and I decided that we were going to visit Las Vegas and celebrate modern civilization. To get there, we took this notorious road, Amboy Road. I've driven it a few times before. To those who don't know it, it's a 2-lane highway that cuts across the middle of the desert. You get the feeling that you're quite literally in the middle of nowhere. There's no cell phone signal for most of the drive. If you crashed, it would likely be an hour or two before an ambulance could even get to you. There are plenty of stories of satanic cult members lying in the middle of the road, staging accidents to stop drivers so they could ambush the Good Samaritans, and supposedly they're never seen again. The golden rule of this road is pretty much that you never stop. If you see someone lying in the road, just keep driving. Now that I think about it, there's probably a good reason why I never see any truckers or cops on that road. Anyway, the ride to Las Vegas from base takes about 3 hours. We hit the road pretty late, and it was particularly windy. Visibility was shit due to the sand blowing all about. I had the great idea of drinking tequila in the passenger seat to make time go by faster. We were about halfway there when my bladder decided that it didn't care about satanic cultists. We absolutely had to stop. We pulled off into the soft sand and I opened the door to get out. It was a pretty cloudy night, so there was pretty much zero ambient light. I could see a few feet in front of me because of the car's headlights, but even those were dimmed by the blowing sand with my eyes half open. I saw something dark in the corner of my eye, followed by a yelp and a torrent of curses from my friend. I quickly stumbled towards the back of the car and I saw my friend on the ground, face first with something biting his leg, violently. All I could see was an extremely dark, lumpy shape. It was like someone had sewn a bunch of different parts of mangy animals together. I froze in fear, unable to make a decision. Before I could move, the thing looked at me, and I swear to God that its eyes glowed faintly red, and it took off down the road. All this happened in maybe 15 seconds. I got my friend in the back seat and inspected his wounds. The only way that I could describe the bite mark was that of a human's. It was the size of a human's, but with pointed teeth and more spaced apart. He was bleeding pretty badly, so I did what any Marine is taught. I took off my belt and placed it a few inches above the wound and made a makeshift tourniquet. Then I wrapped my t-shirt around it and elevated it, then just hoped for the best. He obviously couldn't drive, and I figured I was sober enough to drive the straightest highway in the world. I'm usually extremely against drunk driving, but I wasn't staying to play with whatever was outside. I helped him hop his way over to the passenger seat and ran back to the driver's seat. Maybe it was the adrenaline or the tequila, but I was scared as hell. I could barely hold onto the steering wheel because my hands were shaking so badly. I tried to throw in some shitty jokes to lighten the mood, but they were more for myself than him. At first, I was cruising a mere 70 miles per hour to play it safe, but pretty soon my friend quite literally started screaming in pain. The way he described it is a million daggers flowing through his fucking bloodstream. I sped off after that, and the ETA dropped slowly on the GPS. My friend was in complete agony the entire time, but I honestly couldn't do a thing for him. I told him to bite the seatbelt, but I knew that this was beyond that kind of pain. After about 5 minutes, he began muttering and slurring his words. It then progressed into something completely incomprehensible. Then he was quiet, but he still had his eyes open. I sped up to about 90 miles per hour because I was so worried he was gonna die. I was trying to get a signal on my cell phone when I noticed a bunch of red and blue lights scatter around the inside of the car. Shit. I'm drunk, my license is expired, and I'm speeding. Keep in mind, I've never seen a cop the entire time I've ever been on this road. I began to slow down gradually and look for a good place to pull over. As I'm looking in the mirror, I notice that my friend's radar detector isn't going off. Weird. I'm picturing a billion situations in my head, and all of them end badly. First, I'll get destroyed in the civilian side, with a DUI and a ton of fines. Then I'll get absolutely destroyed by my command. Loss of pay, restriction to my room, and demotion. Fuck. I keep looking for a good spot to pull over. There's a slight bend in the road. I take my eyes off the mirror and strain it out over the road. I immediately look back into the mirror. Nothing. Yet I keep driving and glance over a few more times. Nothing at all. What the hell? My eyes are locked on the mirror, and now I'm waiting for those lights to come around the bend. Absolutely nothing. Suddenly, my gaze is averted by a flashing orange light in front of me. I slow down even more. There's a sign in the middle of the road that said, "Road closed, detour ahead," with an arrow pointing to the left. Granted, this is a straight road, and I'm not going off on some dirt road detour in a Honda Civic, even if it means I can avoid the cops. I stopped right in front of the sign and grabbed the GPS off the dash. As I'm looking at all the different routes, the cop car comes up literally out of nowhere, and is behind me now flashing his lights. It was like he straight up materialized. I look in the mirror and I don't see anyone in the front seats. I don't see any cops walking towards me. But I am beyond creep the fuck out at this point, because a mysterious cop car just appeared out of nowhere. My friend is still unconscious and was bit by something crazy. Suddenly, the lights go out and I step on the gas and run over the stupid sign in my way. The cop car doesn't follow, and I spend about 5 minutes going dangerously fast before I slow down. Visibility is still shit, but after driving this road enough, you know where all the bends and curves are. Thankfully, up ahead, my headlights start reflecting something, and I start to slow down, thinking there's a sign to tell me that the road is closed. Nope. Off to the side of the road were a bunch of cars. One extremely similar in shape to the cop car that was behind me, except it was just a burnt out shell. One car was flipped completely, and the other was on its side, both burnt to blackened metal. I wonder if that would have been my car if I stopped for this mysterious cop that appears out of nowhere. I never saw another road closed sign, and eventually I got to a bigger, more frequented highway, just outside of Prim. At this point, I had service, so I called 911, who told us that the closest hospital was in Vegas. When we arrived, I went in first and told the situation to the receptionist. They came out with a wheelchair and whisked him away while I sat in the waiting room filling out some dumb form. All I know was that they couldn't stitch his leg up due to the nature of the bite, but cleaned and bandaged the wound. He did eventually wake up a few hours later with some pretty sweet drugs. It was almost 5 o'clock by the time we checked into our hotel. He spent the weekend in the hotel room while I lone wolfed it around the city in his honor. We were both extremely sure to drive back in the middle of the day. The only weird thing that happened, that I could say, was the sun was trying to kill us, even when it was setting. With sunglasses on and the sun visors down, we still couldn't see a damn thing. We had to slam on our brakes after seeing a car driving extremely slow in front of us. Eventually, the sun went down and we were treated with hundreds of different colors constantly changing in complexity and warmth. Did not see the burnt out cars or the signs or any more cops. However, we did see 2 cars that had obviously collided head-on, pushed off to the side of the road. Both front ends were horribly mangled. We didn't see anyone inside, so we kept driving. I honestly don't believe that whatever bit my friend was a coyote. They're usually extremely skittish and scared of humans. The bite marks don't match what my friend had either, nor the excruciating pain. It had to be in connection with whatever or whoever was trying to run us off the road. So much for a relaxing weekend after the field. I'm gonna take a break from a chronological order for a brief period to talk about something a little more recent. If you follow me on Twitter, then you know that I went out on another field op last week. I happened to be going to another ghost town, also known as Moat Town. This one was much smaller and not that far from base. There were maybe 8 buildings in total, and they varied from a single-story to 3-story buildings. Here's a picture of the outside of the town. We spent the day hiking this town, and it was just about late afternoon when we finally set our packs down to one of the buildings. The bone-chilling wind decided to pick up, and the temperatures hovered around freezing as the sun slowly disappeared. We spent the next 5 hours practicing various skills in an urban environment, clearing rooms, detainee handling, throwing frag grenades, etc. It got old pretty fast, considering I've been doing this for, years now. Around 10 p.m., we were given the go-ahead to go indoors and away from the wind, and finally get some damn sleep in our warm sleeping bags. I took first watch because I like to get a good block of sleep in. After about an hour, I woke up the guy next and went to sleep. I fell asleep maybe 30 minutes before I was woken up with a nudge. I groggily emerged from my sleeping bag and noticed that it was one of the newer guys that I had woken up for watch. He had been here maybe a month or 2. My first words, understandably, were, "What the fuck do you want?" "Well, spit it out." "For the last 10 minutes, I kept seeing these 2 yellow dots across the street, in the window." "Okay." "I was staring at them for a while, until I heard what sounded like you call me over. Except, you were in your sleeping bag." Absolutely pissed off beyond belief, I put my boots on, grabbed my rifle, and stormed across the street. I went to open the door, but it was locked. These doors don't have locks for safety reasons, so they must have barricaded it or tied it up. I went around back to try the other door. Locked. Got it. Whoever was doing this was a fucking dick for scaring the new guys and waking me up. As I was walking back across the street, I heard a, "Where are you going?" It definitely wasn't the other Marine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I stopped dead in my tracks. The voice was a kind of a mix between a whisper, but it carried an icy, mocking tone with it. Yeah, fuck that shit. I'm going back indoors. I locked eyes with the guy who woke me up, and we both understood what the hell just went down. I told him just to wake up the next guy in a few minutes and go back to sleep. I got in my sleeping bag and drifted off. I tried to burn all the details into memory, for you guys, of course. I didn't get woken up again until the sun rose. The wind seemed fiercer, and it was still ungodly cold. But we were indoors, and luckily the sun was rising. Not bad. Pretty soon we got word that we had to move all of our packs and go about 100 meters from the town. A few of the guys complained and griped, but we did as we were told. I was curious as to why we had to move and go outdoors. The scuttlebutt was that a few guys, including the commanding officer, had some weird experiences in one of the buildings last night. All of them refused to sleep in the buildings, period. I drifted around while everyone was shaving and eating breakfast, to see if I could shed some light on the sudden exodus from the town. I found one of the guys that were in the building pretty quickly and asked him what he had seen. Basically, the night started out with all of the guys huddled around, listening to one of my stories on YouTube, so they could scare the newer guys. A few hours later, a few of them started having crazy nightmares about being in the town and some creature with, cat-like eyes tearing them apart. Except, they were the kind of dreams that never ended. You wake up from one and you're in another. They never knew if they were real or not. The guy on watch tried to wake them up, but they just continued to breathe heavily, sob, whimper, and fidget. When they woke up, they were terrified, and the message was clear. Get the fuck out. I didn't really know what to make of all of it, but I told them to quit listening to my damn stories. Not here, at least. I'm assuming whatever that thing was across the building from mine, it was the same thing that later messed with the other building, for God knows what reason. We continued on with our day. It was packed to the brim with training. During one of our few breaks, I decided to venture into the building where they were all staying in. I had a few guys come with me just in case. It was pretty basic. A few chairs, a desk, and a filing cabinet. I saw that there was this rug on the ground and kicked it on a pure whim. I laughed when I saw the trap door. I opened it and looked down. I didn't see anything unusual. I decided to take a few pictures and move on. Here's one of the door and a painting on the wall. It might be a falafel menu or some voodoo shit, I don't know. Translation's welcome. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful. We continued into the night with our classes and training. It was mostly a blur. I had gotten back to my sleeping bag and uploaded the picture of the trapdoor onto my Twitter, and then just went to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I was woken up to be put on watch, and I put on just about every warming layer that I owned because of the wind. It was pretty dark due to all the clouds hiding the moon, but I could still see the outline of various bushes and shrubbery on the skyline. I walked around for a bit to try to keep warm. I turned my back towards the empty desert, away from the wind. I thought of how nice it was going to be to get back into my sleeping bag. After about 15 minutes, I turned around out of habit and saw a large dark figure on the horizon, maybe 100 meters away. And just as soon as I saw it, it vanished. I made a mental note of the location so I could check it out the next day. I woke up the next guy and got a few more hours of sleep in before the sun came back up. Unfortunately, I didn't get time to wander off into the desert until around lunch. I grabbed a buddy of mine and we walked out to where I was standing, and where I had seen the thing. From there, we walked our 100 or so meters, and we were just about to head back when I spotted some wood sticking out a little further away. We kicked a good portion of sand away and realized that it was another trapdoor. What the hell was another trapdoor doing this far out of town? Our packs were about 150 meters out of the town, and the trapdoor was maybe another 100 meters out. It just didn't make any sense to have a tunnel entrance 250 meters away. I wasn't ballsy enough to open the thing, but I knew I had to get a picture. My friend, the mortarman, is half honey badger, and decided to open it as I was taking the picture. We didn't go down, but we couldn't see the bottom either. It was just an endless ladder. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful, and I didn't have watch until that night. To be clear, we still did train in houses during the day and early evening, but we didn't sleep in them. I did hear from another close friend that he would get weird vibes from a few of the buildings when we were still in them during the night. The next day, we messed around with simulation rounds, which are basically 9mm bullets with wax projectiles filled with paint. I didn't get shot, fortunately, but they're about 10 times worse than a paintball from past experiences. Instead of going to sleep that night, we went back into town to set up patrol. Some guys would stand post, some guys would patrol, and some would rest. I swear, Marines have amnesia. The night started out uneventfully, just a few patrols. We didn't have an enemy, so it was purely just for practice. I slept for maybe an hour and a half and stepped off onto another patrol around the town. I felt like it was a waste of time, but at least we were out of the buildings. When we came back, we were approached by a bunch of mortarmen who asked if we could help them find one of their mortar systems. If you don't know what a mortar is, it fires explosive shells out of a cannon into the air. It's not very heavy, but it can be effective at a decent range. Apparently, one of the mortar guys fell asleep while they were on watch. He was dutifully standing in the wind, and then he wasn't. He woke up inside of the house, and the entire mortar system had vanished. He doesn't remember anything, and he swears that he didn't just go to sleep to get away from the wind. This is one of my friends who went and checked out the trapdoor with me, so I trust what he says. Keep in mind, we didn't have an enemy that night, so no one was able to fuck around and steal shit. These things are extremely expensive, and no one would dare mess around like this. But people still doubt him. The entire company was woken up at about 4 a.m. We searched everywhere in the town in vain. Then we expanded outwards. After about 30 minutes of checking the same areas multiple times, I had an idea. I went over to my mortarman friend and told him that we should check out the trapdoor in the desert that he opened. We grabbed a few other mortarmen and told some people where we were going. When we got there, the trapdoor was open, despite how bad the wind was. I sure as hell wasn't going down there, but the mortarmen were angry and decided to go down just to make sure. I didn't like that idea at all. 3 guys went down, and it sounded like it was about 10 feet. It was pitch black, and the flashlights didn't seem to do much. They were talking amongst themselves for a few seconds as they walked into the tunnel. Then, they were out of earshot. 30 seconds passed, and I started to get worried. I told myself, wait another 30 seconds before I do anything. Just as I was counting down, I heard what sounded like a little girl laugh. Then, the sound of running footsteps. Pretty soon I heard the guys climbing up the ladder. I heard the same laugh again, this time just closer. The first 2 guys had various components of the mortar system, and the last guy had the actual mortar tube, or whatever it was now. It looked like someone had bent it over their knee. I just slammed the door and practically sprinted back to the town. Once we got there, we communicated that we had gotten the damn mortar system back. The guys that went down had some explaining to do to the officers. I'm sure they understood. I went back to sleep for a few hours until the sun came up, and we were woken up for our safety brief. Our last and final day here. We were going to be using blank rounds, smoke grenades, and flares. It was a busy day. As soon as the sun went down, we all just went to sleep. No more training at night in that town. We all got the message. I didn't have watch again, but I did hear a few guys have heard this laugh during the night. One of the guys supposedly got a recording on his phone of the laugh. Still have a lot more. Follow me on Twitter at 035none. Thanks again for all of the support. It's been a while since I've been able to update, and let me start out by saying I've spent a lot of time in the field without creepy things happening. So don't think that a Marine's life is just filled with creepiness. Just recently, I was out there for a few weeks, and nothing even remotely spooky happened. Anyway, last we actually left off, it was in the middle of February with update number 4. It's April now, springtime. The desert is slowly transitioning from a cold and windy purgatory to an absolutely scorching sandbox. Luckily for us, we hit the jackpot of deployment and we were headed off to Australia to do some training for 6 months instead of baking in the desert. Now, I know what you're thinking. Australia sounds great. Yeah, I thought that too. Until we landed in a place called Darwin and stepped off the plane. Instantly, it felt like we were in a sauna. It was extremely humid and we were sweating through our thick uniforms within our first few steps onto the tarmac. It was hell. Flies and mosquitoes were fucking everywhere. They would crawl into your mouth and up your nose if you let them. It seemed like they weren't the only ones with a death wish in this tropical prison. For the first month, we did our little dog and pony show to impress the Australian army. We worked out twice a day and told them all how cool we were. The food they fed us was always some kind of stew made from yesterday's leftovers. Yeah, that got old pretty quick. So, being Americans, we found the nearest fast food restaurant and supplier of 2 liters so we could stock up on calories before the field. We didn't really know what to expect on our first field op. We all knew that we were going to head into the thick brush hundreds of kilometers away from civilization, and we all expected to be killed by 20 different animals the first night, if we were lucky. That's not an exaggeration by any means. There's a plant called the Jimpy Jimpy, aka the suicide plant, because the pain from its sting is so intense and long-lasting that most people and animals just kill themselves. Also, there's a virus in the dirt known as the Vietnam Time Bomb. That stuff will kill you from the inside out. Our first few days out there were pretty exhausting. We did a lot of night patrolling, or as I like to call it, walking blindly into spiderwebs. We would try to sleep during the day, but if you slept for more than an hour, you would wake up dazed and dehydrated from the beating sun. I think it was around day 12 towards the end of the field op, when things kinda started to get interesting. We were completely fucking lost, as usual, wandering around in one long file during the night. There was no moon and you could hear various birds and animals repeat the same noises over and over and over. It was all a blur until the guy in front of me stopped and picked something up. I really didn't pay it much mind until we halted for a break and he turned around and said, "Hey dude, check this out. I found a doll." What? A fucking doll? He held it up and sure enough, it was a doll. The body was completely carved out of wood and it had some fake red hair glued on. The eyes were just burn marks and it had this creepy little smirk scratched across its face. Weird. Keep in mind, we are quite literally in the middle of nowhere. Most of these lands are still completely unexplored. As I'm sipping water trying to rack my brain for answers as to where the fuck this random doll in the middle of nowhere showed up, we started moving again. I'd completely forgotten about the little doll for the next few hours, while we mindlessly walked around and tried to find our objective. It was all kind of a blur, and I fell asleep a few times while walking, so I don't remember much. Eventually, we found our way and arrived to the objective, a small clearing in the middle of nowhere. It was still early in the morning now, and we were supposed to sit there all day and wait for more orders. We were all pretty darn tired at this point, so I sat down and stared off into the distance and just drifted off to sleep. Suddenly, I heard a few grunts to my left and, sure enough, the machine gunners are playing with the gun they found. They are a simple-minded breed and pretty easy to maintain, but they always somehow find a way to screw over everyone else. I remember the distinct thought of, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. I fell back asleep and spent most of the day napping and planning our next objective. Finally, the sun set off in the distance to our next objective. I remember being kind of excited that we only had one more thing to do and then we could go back to base. As the night went on, our long file of Marines began to become more and more spread out. The brush became thicker and there was absolutely zero ambient light. I was struggling to keep up with the guy ahead of me and people kept getting lost and we were constantly stopping to find them. We were just trying to get out of the jungle by this point. I was already creeped out by the extreme darkness, but when our compasses, radio, and GPS equipment started going haywire, I began to lose some composure. No matter how much we tried to spin our compasses and reset our GPS, it would always slowly turn us back to the way that we came. Our radios turned on, but all we could hear is some kind of white noise. Nothing. We knew right away that it had something to do with that fucking doll. Maybe it was some weird voodoo aboriginal witchcraft doll. Who knows? Just bad vibes. I told the guy who picked her up to gently set her down somewhere nice and to keep walking. Nothing. Everything still went haywire. Our leaders decided to take a break to see if they could figure out how to navigate using the stars. Being in the southern hemisphere, the constellations are all different. While I'm doing my best to keep a cool and level head, I hear the guy in front of me start to frantically scream. Pure fucking terror. A few guys walk up and calm him down, but he spits out a stream of expletives followed by doll. Shit. The doll somehow made its way into his backpack. We were all too spread out for this to be some kind of practical joke. It was just too impossible. We both walked past it when he set it down, and no one is laughing. He grabs the doll and puts it down and starts talking to it and apologizing as if it were some kind of real person. I remember making a mental note of how absurd that was. By now, our fearless leaders have figured out where to go, so we start moving. I don't want to stop because I know that doll is probably still with us. But we're talking about lieutenants. We're bound to get lost. Eventually, we stop and all of us are holding our breath while the guy checks his pack. Nothing. We sit down to relax. The air gets a little lighter and a little easier to breathe. There's a bunch of commotion coming from a few guys back. One of the lieutenants found the doll in his bag. He has completely lost his mind at this point. He's laughing and crying at the same time. Day 12 of the field op, all the heat, the bugs, and the creepy shit just about broke his mind. We put the doll a few meters away from us and everyone stops to assess the situation. We're lost, in the middle of nowhere, we have no idea where we're going, and we don't have much water. Awesome. I can imagine the smirk on the doll's face while we all collectively fucking lose our minds. At least the sun is starting to come up. For the next 30 minutes, we try to confirm our last known location and get a general idea of where we are. But the doll isn't done with us yet. Suddenly, we start to smell smoke. And off in the distance, in the tree line, we see a blazing fire pick up. Someone grabs the ineffective lieutenant and we head away from the fire in the opposite direction. Sure enough, it's coming from that way too. We keep trying to find a way out until we realize that we're walking in circles. There's fire everywhere. In the face of imminent death, sit down and take cool pictures and just hope someone finds them in the aftermath. Here is one of those cool pictures. I was never really a believer in any kind of higher being, and I guess I still don't. I think we just got extremely lucky. We heard a helicopter fly overhead, and I'm assuming that they realized that we were lost after we hadn't checked in for a super long amount of time. The pilot made this amazing landing between two trees and began to ferry us out to a clearing a few hundred meters away. We made a conscious effort to leave that damn doll behind in the flames. However, my troubles were not all behind me. Guess what we found when we got back?
So, obviously, I'm not 035 None, and hopefully soon after I've posted this, he'll verify. But after reading his last update, Weird Shit I've Seen as a Marine Part 6, I felt called to explain everything that happened with that doll and why it pissed me off people weren't taking this story as seriously as the others. Because this damn doll, made our lives hell for over a month. I don't have as great of a writing skill set as my friend does, but I'll give this my best shot. A little background on me, though. I've been with 035 None since we both hit the fleet, and I'm one of the highly intelligent, rock-eating, simple-to-maintain machine gunners. Now, I'm not the one to find the doll, but someone in my machine gun team did. Myself, 035 None, and a small group of us made a pact that once we got back to the States, we'd let this die and not bring up names or pictures. I'm going to break a few of those promises now. The man that found the doll, we'll call him Ronnie because I'm not dumb enough to use real names. He picks this doll up near the end of our break-off patrol, in the middle of the bush. As aforementioned, we are super highly intelligent, and even a cool rock can keep us distracted for hours, so this doll was definitely an upgrade. He passed it around the squad, and we each take turns looking at the black eyes and weird-looking grin on its face. Someone said it was like a flower in the middle of the bush, so somehow the name Daisy got thrown around. It was blatantly obvious that this thing was creepy, and that only meant one thing to the machine gunners. Fucking with one of the scared mortarmen. We'll call him Taxi, which is a favorite pastime of the platoons. He was literally freaked out by the simplest things. I once saw him jump up and down and run 10 feet away because he saw a moth, so needless to say, he was struggling in Darwin as it was. After we got our fill with making him miserable, we all fell asleep until it was time to finish the patrol later that afternoon. I'm not going to bore you with the same details of the hike and how miserable we all were when we wandered around for hours because everyone knows you can't spell lost without LT. One thing I will say that 035 None left out was the fog. It came out of nowhere. It made it hard to see and to breathe. It was almost as if the Stephen King book The Mist had come to life. What was creepiest was that almost immediately after that is when the LT found Daisy in his pack, and I rushed to grab it. If you want to get rid of it right, you have to do it yourself, right? When the fire broke out, I wasn't going to take any more chances. I saw the flames creeping up and set the doll on a log that had caught fire already. This doll needed to die. When we stepped on the CH-53, we all felt a slight breath of relief. We were done with the field. We had a couple weeks back in the rear before we went back out, and we had a bunch of Great Northern and VB waiting for us in our rooms. No one was making it through the night without being plastered. And to commemorate the weird experience, we of course watched the movie Annabelle before going to our rooms and passing out. To give a rundown of how our rooms were set up, we had a building with about 7 rooms in it, and each of us somehow managed to get our own room. We had my machine gun squad of 5 guys, Ronnie included, Taxi, and 035 None. We were an odd bunch, but we made it work. Best of all, our building was at least 2 kilometers away from the rest of our company. We were literally alone. And afraid. The next morning, we all woke up to the sound of Taxi screaming his head off. We all ran out to the hall to see what's going on, and he ran out of his room, tears down his face. One by one, we all went into his room, and we all froze up. Sitting on his nightstand next to his bed was Daisy, except she wasn't burnt at all. In fact, she had a little yellow dress on, and her mouth wasn't a grin anymore. It was a frown. Almost as if she was scolding us. Taxi kept asking us who put that doll in his room, and none of us admitted to it. The rational part of me wanted to believe that one of the guys in my squad was just a sick and sadistic fuck and was messing with them on a whole new level, but no one fessed up. We didn't have time to think about it that much, though, before we got dressed and went to formation. On the way out, Ronnie took the doll and threw it on the ground and stomped on it. One of the arms broke off, and we kicked it into a storm drain and left the doll on the road. After formation, we walked back to our rooms to grab our gear. We were going to work on clearing houses, and we assumed we were going to be using some of the barracks buildings, but we had to meet up in an hour with the rifle platoons. While we were walking back, we noticed that Daisy wasn't there. We all started validating it somehow. Things like, I bet one of the Aussies came by and picked it up, or a bird or an officer came by and took it out of the road. We are on the road that leads to the gym. And as we walked back into our rooms, our nightmares became fruition. I heard Ronnie yell for me. I walked in, assuming that he had a question on what gear to grab, but no. Daisy was sitting on his bed, and not only had a pissed-off look on her face, both arms, and a red dress, she was pointing right out the sliding glass door. I composed myself just long enough to see what she's pointing at. It looked like a town on the other side of a knee-high wooden fence. We were told by the Aussies that it was just an old barracks that wasn't being used anymore, right when we got to base a couple months prior. We left Daisy where she was, and we ran back to meet up with our rifle brethren. And then we began to walk, right for the old town behind our barracks room. Emotions raged through all of us, a mixture of anger and fear. Why had this doll started tormenting us, and why will it not, die? As we got closer to the town, I started observing it more and more. It looked like it had been deserted, not moved out of. Cars were broken down in the streets, and tree limbs were blocking roads and sidewalks. What was even weirder were the buildings. They were all on stilts. Single-story houses that were 10 feet up in the air, and underneath was a concrete slab. We went throughout the day, and nothing weird happened except we passed a bunch of no trespassing asbestos area signs. Presumably the reason the Aussies moved out. But when the sun started to set, we were getting in a couple of night raids in. I was the lucky son of a bitch who got to sit in an abandoned, asbestos-ridden, and creepy house, pretending to be the enemy, while the platoon patrolled from about 1 kilometer away to get to the house. A sergeant had told me to just lay down in the room at the end of the hall and wait for them to breach. So to give you a general layout of the house, there's one door in and out. Walk in the door and look left, and it's a giant open living room. To your 2 o'clock is a small kitchen with an island countertop. Nowhere to hide is what I'm trying to say. Look to your immediate right, and it's a long hallway. There were 2 doors on the left, one being a bedroom and the other a bathroom. 2 doors on the right, one being a bedroom and one being a coat closet. At the end of the hall is a door with a full-size mirror on the wall, perfectly positioned to scare the piss out of anyone, especially at night when you're looking for people and you have your rifle flashlight PEQ-16 on, and it's like someone with the same rifle as you is about to shoot you at the end of the hall. Naturally, I chose the room at the end of the hall for this factor. So, I set myself up inside a closet in the room at the end of the hall, leaving just enough room to see anyone coming into the room, but not enough to be obvious that I'm hiding. I gotta think like the enemy, you know? Tough, realistic training. I wait about 10 to 15 minutes, and I must have dozed off, because the next thing I know is hearing the door bust open to the house. A bunch of people yelling, "U.S. Marines!" and "Left! Right! Clear!" They eventually made it to my room and kick in the door. 3 flow in and were confused. Instead of the normal "room clear" or "press," from them shooting me through the opening I let my rifle stick out of. Gotta make it a little easier. My goal was to make them find me, not hide indefinitely or be super obvious. I hear, "What the fuck?" and see everyone drop their rifles. I jump out of the closet and kill them, but then see what their lights were shining on. I threw up. Sitting against the wall was Daisy, finger pointing right at the closet. That wasn't the worst part, though. Above the doll were the words, He's in there. Written in blood. I fell down and slumped against the wall. A Marine immediately gets on a knee next to me and screamed, "Corpseman, up!" I looked down and noticed my desert blouse was soaked in blood. The bitch of a doll used my blood without me knowing. Sorry if this post is short and not as detailed, but I can't help thinking that telling the whole story right now is a bad idea. Not yet. I got a picture of the fog a couple minutes before the LT started freaking out. Bonus. You can see 035 None with the irrelevant t-shirt launcher on his back, a couple guys in front of me.
I woke up dazed in the back of a Humvee. It was in the middle of the day and the AC was still broken. Whatever weird, crazy dream I was having was gone, and I was still in the hell known as 29 Palms. We weren't going fast enough to make the heat go anywhere, but I still kept my head close to the window and stared mindlessly off. Our self-chosen metallic prison hurled itself further into the desert, kicking up dust as it went. "Hey, look, up ahead to the right. There's someone walking," said Gomez, who was in the back seat with me. We slowed down. A lone figure stumbled slowly forward with their head down. Details emerged and I realized that it was a man. I've heard stories about random scavengers and drugged-out roamers, but I didn't think they were ever true. Pretty soon he stopped moving and just simply stared at us as we passed him. He had short, mangy gray hair and wrinkled, leathery skin. Somewhere in the depths of his dark eye sockets, he might have had eyes, but I didn't see him. He wore a ragged black shirt and old shorts. All he did was stare at us as we passed. No emotion, no gesture, nothing. A few guys joked around, but I think we were all a bit nervous about who the hell it was. Another hour or so and we arrived at our destination and began to set up a complex defense on a flat piece of land. By the time 2 a.m. came around, we were done building our defense perimeter. Machine guns and mortars were dug in, and we had taken our tanks off to the flanks. I thought about it for just a second. No one is taking our flat piece of land. And just as I thought that, the wind picked up and blew sand into my face. I took the first hour of watch while the other 2 guys slept for a bit. There probably wasn't going to be anyone attacking us tonight, but good habits win wars or something like that. After an hour of being blasted by sand, I emerged from my hole and woke up the next guy. I found one guy but didn't see the other. He was probably behind a rock or a dune or something. I woke up the guy and saw that he grudgingly put his gear on. He probably knows where the other guy is. I got inside of my sleeping bag and fell asleep instantly. Pretty soon, someone was shaking me awake. I checked my watch and realized I'd only been asleep for an hour. "What the hell are you waking me up for? Go wake up Gomez." "I can't fucking find him. I've been looking for him for 10 minutes. He's not here." "Fucking boot." I get out of my sleeping bag and begin getting dressed. Gomez couldn't have gone very far. I spent about 5 minutes checking the surrounding dunes of sand and came up with nothing. I checked his bag and his sleeping bag was definitely gone. So he was somewhere. Pretty soon, everyone was awake, and we were in one big line combing the desert for this guy in the early morning light. We had gone about a kilometer from our original spot, and people began to just think he ran away at this point. We went a little farther, and there was this small mountainside that we grudgingly climbed. When we got to the top, people were jokingly checking under each and every rock. "Gomez, you under here?" Some lance corporal lifted up a small boulder. He wasn't under any of them. As we were coming down the other side of it, we noticed that there was a small opening in the rock face. It kind of resembled one of the old mine shaft entrances. Most of the old mines have been barred up, but this one wasn't for some reason. We made a quick decision that a handful of us would go check the place out while the other Marines headed back. Just to be sure, right? I was the first one in. It definitely was a very old mine shaft. Whatever wood was left was rotting into dust. That gave me some anxiety, but we crept forward slowly with our lights on as bright as possible. As we crept further and further into the cave, I noticed that it was a lot cooler inside, which was nice, but it gave me a really strange vibe. Eventually we got to a split in the cave. 2 of us went left, 2 of us went right. Typical horror story scenario, right? I ended up going right and was quickly disappointed that there was a dead end maybe 15 feet in. As I was walking back, I heard some cursing and people struggling off to the left side of the cave. One Marine was on the ground, unconscious. Gomez, our Houdini of a Marine, was on top of the other one. He was fully primal, fight or flight mode. We got there just in time as Gomez picked up a rock to smash the other guy's head in. He just wouldn't snap out of it. He's not the Gomez we knew anymore. It took 3 of us an exhaustingly long time to finally choke him out. We caught our breath for a minute before we slowly drug him and our other unconscious friend out of the cave. We started to see the entrance to the cave, and I saw the ragged, weathered, dark figure that I saw on the road earlier. "It's too late," he said in a wickedly evil voice. I woke up dazed in the back of a Humvee. It was in the middle of the day and the AC was still broken. Whatever weird, crazy dream I was having was gone, and I was still in the hell known as 29 Palms. We weren't going fast enough to make the heat go anywhere, but I still kept my head close to the window and stared mindlessly off. Our self-chosen metallic prison hurled itself further into the desert, kicking up dust as it went. I looked to the left and there was an empty seat. Confused, I asked, "Where did Gomez go?" "Who the fuck is Gomez?" Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this series, and if you did, please let me know. I feel like I have to make the distinction that I personally am not a Marine, we're just narrating a story from one. But if you enjoyed part 6A, the other account, go subscribe to King Spook. He does absolutely amazing stories. He's one of the reasons I got started. And now I would like to take the opportunity to thank my $10 and above patrons in order: Dan R., Paul Z., Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, Chaos X, JY, Pyromancer, Hayden MH, and Ethan A. Thank you guys so much. If you want to be read off at the end of the video, please go over to Patreon and subscribe at the $10 or above tier. If you want to subscribe at the $5 tier, you get your name in the description below. And I started working on the Patreon only story, and I lost the file for it, so I'm going to have to start all over again, but it'll be done this week at some point, I hope. So if you want to join that, get some access to some Patreon-only content, and you can feel free to suggest content. I'm always open to see what you guys have to say. So please go down to the link below for any of these things. Thank you.